Summer 1944. A hedgerow in Normandy, thick with dust. A single American rifleman rises to one knee. The German across the field has him cold. He fires. He fires again. He keeps firing. No pause to reload. No fumbling with a bolt. 8 fast shots crack out before the enemy can work his rifle a third time. Then a bright metallic ping rings across the field as an empty clip springs free. The men who carried this weapon called it heavy. Officers called it too intricate to survive the mud. Half the world's armies had bet money it would jam the moment a war got dirty. It looked like a rifle no ordinary soldier could keep running. It was the most complicated service rifle any nation had ever handed a common infantryman. It was also the first that let one man out shoot 3. This is the story of the rifle everyone said was too clever to work, and how it quietly rewrote what a single-foot soldier could do to the enemy in front of him. To understand why the Garand mattered, you have to understand the problem it solved. And the problem was old. It was as old as gunpowder itself. For centuries, an infantryman fired, then stopped. He worked a lever or a bolt, chambered a fresh round, aimed, and fired again. Every shot cost him time. Every shot cost him his aim. In the years before the Second World War, nearly every army on Earth still armed its riflemen this way. The German soldier carried a bolt-action Mauser. The British carried the bolt-action Lee Enfield. The Japanese carried the bolt-action Arisaka. All fine rifles, all accurate. All fundamentally the same as the muskets their grandfathers had carried, in the one way that decided fights. After each shot, the soldier had to stop and reload by hand. On a firing range, that hardly matters. In a real fight, it decides who lives. A man working a bolt takes his eye off the target. His body shifts. For 1 full second, sometimes longer, he is not shooting. He is a passenger. Multiply that by every rifleman in a squad, and you get a terrible arithmetic. When 2 squads meet, the side that can put more aimed rounds downrange in the first 10 seconds usually wins. Everything else is detail. The United States Army had understood this problem for years. The trouble was that nobody had solved it well. Building a rifle that reloaded itself sounds simple. It is not. A self-loading rifle has to trap some of the violent energy of each shot and use it to eject the spent case, cock the mechanism, and feed a fresh round all in a fraction of a second, all while a soldier drags it through sand, snow, river mud, and the filth of a battlefield. Do it wrong and the rifle jams at the worst possible moment. Every early attempt had been too heavy, too fragile, too fussy, or too expensive to hand to millions of men. Everyone had tried. Everyone had failed. The graveyard of self-loading rifle designs stretched back decades, and the lesson every ordnance officer had learned was simple. The idea was a dream, and dreams jam in the mud. The man who refused to accept that was a quiet Canadian-born immigrant named John Garand. He was born in Quebec, one of 12 children, and after his mother died, the family crossed the border into New England. He was not a soldier. He was a toolmaker and a self-taught engineer, a man who thought in gears and springs with barely any formal schooling past the early grades. He learned his trade on the floors of textile mills and precision tool shops, and in 1919 he walked into the government arsenal at Springfield, Massachusetts, where he would spend the next 3 decades chasing one thing, a mechanism that would not fail. He chased it for the better part of 15 years. The physics he had to tame were brutal. When the rifle fires, expanding gas drives the bullet down the barrel at roughly 2,800 feet per second. That is fast enough to cross 9 football fields in a single second. Garand's insight was to steal a tiny fraction of that gas, bleed it off through a small port near the muzzle, and use its pressure to drive a piston. The piston shoved the action backward, kicked out the empty case, and let a spring slam a fresh round home. All of it happened in less time than it takes to blink. The soldier did nothing but pull the trigger again. The heart of it was a loading system unlike anything else in service. The rifle fed from a metal clip holding 8 rounds. The soldier pressed the full clip down into the open action with his thumb, and the rifle was ready. He fired all 8, and when the last shell left the barrel, the empty clip ejected itself with that unmistakable metallic ping. That sound became one of the most famous noises of the war, and we will come back to it, because a legend grew up around it that most people still get wrong. Here is the number that mattered. A trained soldier with a bolt-action rifle could fire perhaps 10 to 15 aimed shots in a minute, if everything went right and his hands stayed steady. A soldier with a Garand, firing at his practical maximum, could put 40 to 50 aimed shots downrange in that same minute. Think about what that means on the ground. Where the enemy fielded one rifleman's volume of fire, a single American could produce the fire of 3 men, sometimes more. Multiply that across a whole squad, a whole platoon, a whole invasion beach, and the math becomes staggering. The United States had not just improved the rifle, it had roughly tripled the firepower of every infantryman who carried one, without adding a single extra man. The Army Ordnance Department standardized it in January 1936 as the United States Rifle, caliber .30, M1. It was the first semi-automatic rifle in the world to become the standard weapon of a nation's infantry. Other countries had built self-loaders. None had managed to put one in the hands of nearly every rifleman. In a letter written in January 1945, General George Patton, a man not given to soft praise, called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. Whether or not you'd take a tank general at his word on rifles, the machine backed him up. It was heavy, about 9.5 pounds. It was complicated, hundreds of precisely machined parts, and it worked. It worked in the freezing Ardennes. It worked in the volcanic ash of the Pacific Islands. It worked when simpler rifles, in theory more reliable, were the ones lying jammed in the dirt. If you are the kind of person who wants the real history and not the recycled myths, subscribing helps this channel keep digging for it. Numbers on a page are one thing. What the rifle did to the men on the other end is another. Consider the American infantryman in the hedgerows of Normandy in the summer of 1944. The German defender was often a veteran, dug in, patient, waiting behind his bolt-action Mauser for the American to expose himself. In the old arithmetic, that defender held the advantage. He fired, ducked, worked his bolt, and fired again on his own time. But now the man coming at him did not have to stop. The American could keep a steady stream of aimed fire on the German's position, pinning his head down, while a second American moved. The rifle did not just kill, it changed the geometry of the fight. It let small groups of Americans pin and flank an enemy who, a generation earlier, would have held them off. Listen to what German soldiers themselves said after the war. Again and again, in interviews and memoirs, they described the shock of American volume of fire. They had trained to face bolt-action rifles, the same kind they carried. Instead, they met a wall of rapid, aimed shots from ordinary riflemen, not machine gunners, just infantry. Men who had faced the Soviets and the British spoke of the American rifle with a specific unease. It took away the pause they had counted on. It made every American squad feel heavier than it was. Now, about that famous ping. When the last round fired and the empty clip sprang free, it made a sound the enemy could sometimes hear. A persistent legend says German soldiers learned to listen for the ping, then charged in the half-second before the American could reload, catching him with an empty rifle. It is a great story. It is also almost certainly a myth. On a roaring battlefield, no one is reliably picking one small ring out of the noise of combat. And here is the part the legend gets exactly backward. After the war, The Army studied this. A survey of hundreds of combat veterans found that far more of them valued the ping as a useful signal to reload than ever saw it as a danger. To the man holding the rifle, the ping was not a death sentence. It was a reminder. As for the tale that soldiers tossed spare clips to fake the ping and lure the enemy out, it is a good campfire story with no solid evidence behind it. We flag all of this because the accuracy is the point. The ping was real. The clip was real. The idea that it got Americans killed is Hollywood, not history. The combat record is not about one ambush or one hero. It is bigger than that. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, to the frozen ridges of Korea a few years later, the M1 Garand was the rifle in the hands of the American soldier who did the closest, hardest work of the war. It armed the men who took the beaches, cleared the hedgerows, and held the line at Bastogne. Its measure is not a single kill. Its measure is that the enemy learned to fear the sheer weight of fire that came from men who should, by every pre-war assumption, have been firing one careful shot at a time. To be fair to the enemy, and fairness is the whole point, the German soldier's Mauser was in some ways the finer rifle. It was beautifully made. It was superbly accurate. In the hands of a trained marksman, a Mauser could reach out and hit a target with a precision the Garand's designers never chased. The Germans were not fools, and their rifle was not obsolete junk. On a shooting range, one-on-one, slow and deliberate, the Mauser might well win. But wars are not shooting ranges, and here is the turn. Late in the war, German engineers saw the problem clearly and built one of the most advanced infantry weapons of the entire conflict, the Sturmgewehr, the first true assault rifle, a genuinely revolutionary design that pointed the way to every modern rifle since. It was arguably ahead of the Garand in concept. So why did it not save them? Because Germany built it too late and could never build enough of it. Only around 400,000 were ever made, most in the final months a drop against the millions of men still carrying the same bolt action their fathers had used. That is the real American advantage, and it is not a story about one clever gadget. It is a story about a whole nation. The United States did not just design a self-loading rifle. It designed one that could be mass-produced by the millions to a consistent standard, and then it put one in the hands of nearly every rifleman it sent to fight. Around 4 million M1 Garands were built during the war, and more than 5 million in all before production ended. The Germans had a better rifle on paper and could not arm their army with it. The Americans had a very good rifle in reality and armed everyone. In war, the weapon that exists in the hands of the man who needs it beats the better weapon that never arrives. Reliability you can build 1,000,000 times over beats brilliance you can only build a few thousand of. Go back to that hedgerow in Normandy. The single American on one knee firing 8 fast shots while the German is still working his bolt. The empty clip springing free with a bright metallic ping. For years, the experts had said a rifle that complicated could never survive a real war. Too many parts, too clever by half. It would jam in the mud and get good men killed. They were wrong. The very thing they dismissed as a weakness, that intricate self-loading heart, was the thing that let one ordinary soldier do the work of 3. It did not win the war by itself. No single weapon ever does. But when the American infantrymen rose in that hedgerow and did not have to stop, the enemy across the field learned a hard truth. The rifle they called too complicated to work had just made the man carrying it 3 times as dangerous. Sometimes the machine everyone calls too clever to survive is exactly the one that changes what a single man can do. And a country that can build that machine millions of times over is a country that is very hard to beat.